Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to address you in my capacity as a special rapporteur to present my report. I take the opportunity to thank member states, civil society organizations, human rights defenders, and survivors who have contributed to this report with courage and conviction. In my report, I acknowledge and welcome Eritrea's recent engagement with some human rights mechanisms. In December 2024, Eritrea took a positive step with the ratification of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Eritrea also actively participated in its fourth Universal Periodic Review in May 2024, and it is reviewed by the Committee on the Rights of the Child in January 2025. However, I remain deeply concerned over the actual human rights situation on the ground. While the government of Eritrea frequently expresses commitment to economic, social, and cultural rights at the international fora, in practice, the authorities routinely violate even the most basic obligations under core human rights treaties to which Eritrea is a party. This approach is selective, instrumental, and deeply inconsistent with international norms. The authorities of Eritrea...
Colleagues, please continue your conversation outside the room. Conference services, please make sure that we have the conditions to continue our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I apologize. Please continue.
Thank you. The authorities of Eritrea invoke sovereignty and development to reflect criticism while they continue to systematically violate civil and political rights and deny due process to thousands of Eritreans who remain in arbitrary detention or subjected to enforced disappearance. Freedom of expression, association, assembly, religion, and the right to participate in public affairs are effectively non-existent, as they are only granted upon the government approval and to those who align with the positions of the authorities. The government of Eritrea continues to subject the population to a system of indefinite military or civilian service that goes far beyond civic duty, far beyond the government's proclaimed goals of promoting nation building and development, and undoubtedly beyond the limitations imposed by international human rights law. Eritrea argues the national service program is limited to 18 months by law, but the government has never respected its own legislation. The reality is that the national service program is a system of social control and indoctrination, where coercion and grave human rights violations are widespread. The length of an individual national service is arbitrary and left to the discretion of the authorities, with most Eritreans being forced to flee to serve for periods spanning from several years to over 2 decades in both military and civil roles. This system has had profound social, economic, and developmental impacts and had left generations unable to envision or to work towards a future of their own choosing. Imagine having no control over your life. Imagine having no choice over your education or career, being separated from your loved ones and not being granted leave to spend with your family for months, often for years. Imagine being forced to work under threat of imprisonment in inhumane conditions, under threat of torture, working for a meager pay that is not sufficient to sustain your life, being afraid for your life, for your family. Now imagine living like this for years, sometimes for decades, and not known when or if you will ever be released. Imagine risking your life to escape only to be treated as a traitor or a criminal, to be imprisoned without any process, tortured and mistreated. How can the authorities call this a civic duty? How can this ever be justified in the name of development? How can the arbitrary detention and enforced disappearance of dissidents for 20 years be necessary for a nation building? Isn't it? Human rights obligations are not a menu for governments to pick and choose from. Human rights are universal, indivisible, and inevitably intertwined. As detailed in my report, The continued militarization of education and forced conscription of students had negative impact on the right to education and led to high dropout rates, child marriage, and early pregnancy. The indefinite conscription of teachers and medical personnel severely undermines vital public services and contributes to a shortage of essential professionals as they continue to flee the country. Dams and other development infrastructure should not be built with conscripted forced labor. Eritrea's selective engagement with human rights reflects a deeper unwillingness to accept accountability and rule of law. Nearly a decade has passed since the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea concluded that crimes against humanity may have been committed in a context of widespread and systematic human rights violations. Yet no meaningful progress has been made towards accountability. As detailed in my report, there have been no investigations, no prosecutions, and no truth-seeking processes initiated by the Eritrean authorities. In fact, patterns of gross human rights violations, including the widespread use of arbitrary and incommunicado detention and enforced disappearance, persist unabated and constitute a government policy. Hundreds of Muslim teachers, religious community leaders, and mosque imams have been forcibly disappeared since 1991, when the Eritrean authorities targeted and closed Muslim religious schools and institutions. Their whereabouts are unknown to this date. They represent only a fraction of the thousands who have vanished into the vast network of detention sites across the country. This complete impunity cannot be normalized. In this context, the lack of accountability is not a side effect. It is a central mechanism of rule within an entrenched system of repression. In the absence of domestic mechanisms, the responsibility to pursue accountability lies with the international community, which must act decisively to ensure that impunity does not prevail. As of June 2024, Eritrea was the 10th largest country of origin for refugees and asylum seekers globally, with 18% of its population having fled the country according to UNHCR. Eritrea has the third highest rate worldwide of nationals who had fled the country relative to its population size. Over the reporting period, the situation of Eritrean refugees and asylum seekers globally continued to deteriorate, compounded with xenophobia, restrictive migration policies, and the proliferation of conflicts and violence in important and destination countries such as Sudan, Ethiopia, and Libya. I'm gravely concerned over the continued arbitrary detention and deportation of Eritreans from Egypt and Ethiopia without adequate legal safeguards. Upon return to Eritrea, deportees were reportedly subjected to arbitrary detention, forced conscription, and in some cases, enforced disappearance. In Israel, Eritrean asylum seekers continue to face legal uncertainty and to be denied protection under the state restrictive asylum frameworks and policies. Despite widespread recognition of the human rights violations that compel Eritreans to flee, many states are failing to provide the adequate required protection they are entitled to under international refugee and human rights law. I urge all states to uphold the principle of non-refoulement and ensure access to fair asylum procedures. The Eritrean government continues to engage in transnational repression, targeting members of the diaspora. As outlined in my report, Eritrean activists and even ordinary community members faced intimidation, surveillance, and in some cases, indeed have been subjected to attack or harassment by pro-government actors abroad. I urge host countries to recognize these acts as violation of fundamental rights and exercise due diligence to protect Eritrean communities from foreign interference, while upholding their rights to organize, advocate, and live free from intimidation. Your Excellencies, the endure and courage of the Eritrean people, those inside the country, those in exile, and those still searching for forcibly disappeared loved ones, must be met with more than words. It must be met with action. The situation in Eritrea is not static. It is entrenched. Violations are systemic, and the need for accountability is urgent. To the families of the disappeared, I say you are not forgotten. To those detained without charges or trial, who have not been heard from in decades, your names will continue to be spoken. To Eritrean youth who remain in the country, as well to those who continue to risk their lives to flee, you are deserving a future free from fear and persecution. 10 years after the Commission of Inquiry warned this Council of crimes against humanity, not a single step has been taken by the Eritrean authorities to acknowledge wrongdoing, deliver justice, dismantle machinery of repression. The silence of the state must not be mirrored by the silence from the international community. Now is the time to reaffirm that no state is beyond scrutiny and that the rights of the Eritrean people are not a matter of negotiation or political convenience. They are universal, inalienable, and long overdue. I thank you.